On Wednesday, the European Union called on Israel to halt its campaign in Lebanon and Iran. And EU leaders are meeting today to further evaluate the situation in the Middle East. Well, we're going to talk more about Europe's role in the Iran war now with Steven Everts, director of the European Union Institute for Security Studies. Steven, thanks for taking the time to speak to us. Europe obviously relies heavily on energy exports, and it's really exposed to spiraling prices, particularly since the Strait of Hormuz was closed. Just first of all, set the scene for us. How bad is the situation in Europe now?
Look, this is not Europe's war. We didn't ask for this war. We were not consulted on it. But it is our problem, right? Because a war that is sort of spiraling out of control, as your reports indicate, wider regional ramifications, Lebanon, attacks on energy installations across the region. This is pretty serious, right? Europeans are affected in multiple ways. One of them is the one that you mentioned just now. It's the most immediate, the most obvious, perhaps. Oil prices above $100. Price for gas doubled roughly in the last week or so. This is hurting Europeans, as it is hurting other people around the world as well. Let's not forget about that. But we have a strong interest to contribute as much as we can to the path of de-escalation. We want this war to end as soon as possible, and we want to work with people around the region, first of all, but also further afield that, like us, want to bring this war to an end.
So you mentioned this de-escalation, the EU obviously calling for that. It doesn't seem, though, like anyone's listening at this point.
At the moment, we're in a logic of war, of action and reaction, of retaliation, and that's that's true. At the same time, you also reported about meetings of Gulf leaders. It's notable that the European Union has reached out very much to them as well in the past to see if we can partner with them. India, Japan, other Asian countries are also, like us, affected by a war that they didn't choose. And I think that many European leaders are trying to push very much in that direction. We'll see what's going to happen later today, coming out of the summit meeting in Brussels, if we can put some flesh on that bone of the diplomatic push that now needs to happen with others.
What about on the flip side? What now could draw Europe further into this war?
Well, there is a risk, but I think people are quite alert to it, that, let's say, when individual European countries move military assets, say, closer to the region, France is one, the Netherlands, others are doing so too. There is potentially a risk that if we're not careful, that perhaps efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to ensure freedom of navigation, which is also a European interest, that this get mixed up with the conduct of the war, that we are seen potentially as participating in a sort of subcontracting role or whatever you want to call it, that we get sort of sucked into being associated with an offensive set of operations. And I think that's something that we have to be very careful to avoid. I think people are alert to this, and European leaders have spoken about this risk in recent days, but it is important that we hold to that.
Indeed, because Donald Trump, the U.S. president, has been asking for help from Europe, particularly when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. Europe has so far been resistant. Will it stay resistant? Can it stay resistant to the power of the U.S.?
I think people are quite clear about that. I mean, we didn't start this war together with the United States and Israel. Some of the consequences that we now see unfold, including the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, were predictable and predicted. So I think the Europeans are quite clear that that's the thing to avoid. At the same time, it's true that Europe is affected by let's say, a longer term closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And we have an interest of finding, as I said earlier, an end to the war, de-escalate, cessation of violence. And then in a subsequent phase after that, perhaps Europeans with Asians, with Gulf countries and others can look at ways to work on maritime security, work on freedom of navigation. This has happened in the past. There have been previous instances in history where Europeans and others have escorted vessels, but that was in a post-war circumstance, not in the middle of the war, in which you get mixed up, and that will be ill-advised.
Well, just to wrap up, do you think in some way this could represent an opportunity for Europe? Could there be some kind of shift in the power balance with the U.S.?
I'm not sure about that, because I mean, overwhelmingly this war has negative consequences. Energy, regional stability. Also, for instance, it's a giant gift to Mr. Putin, because there's more money coming his way. Some U.S. sanctions on Russia oil exports have been lifted. Air defense assets are diverted from Ukraine, where they're really, really needed. So I think Europeans really see this war as a diversion, as an unnecessary war. The sooner it comes to an end, the better it is.
Steven, thank you for that. That's Steven Everts. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Pleasure.